Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this comforting expectation of, well, absolute precision.
Right, yeah. Like you want a clear answer.
Yeah, you go into a hospital, you sit in that sterile room, and you wait for the machinery to do its job. I mean, you break your arm, the doctor takes an x-ray, puts it up on the light board, and there is a jagged white line.
You can see it right there.
Spot on. The doctor points to it and says, there's the problem. It is binary reality. The bone is broken or the bone is intact. The blood test shows an infection or it does not.
And it is comforting because it is visible. We like our problems to be categorized neatly.
Oh, for sure.
When a threat is physical, we can put a cast on it, we can prescribe an antibiotic, or we can at least measure its dimensions. We know what we are dealing with, and that knowledge brings a sense of control.
But then you step out of the hospital and into the world of human malice. You step into the realm of betrayal, character assassination, and slander, and suddenly that diagnostic x-ray machine is just broken.
Completely useless.
Right. You cannot put a coworker's whisper campaign on a light board. You cannot take a blood test to measure the toxicity of a false accusation. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
It really is.
So, welcome to Reform Thinking, where we take a deep dive into the source material to uncover the mechanics of things we usually cannot see.
The landscape of human relationships, especially when malice is introduced, is notoriously difficult to map. I mean, people smile to your face while laying traps for your feet.
Yeah, that is the worst part.
But the text we are examining today offers a startlingly clear anatomy of this very behavior. It takes the invisible poison of slander and the hidden machinery of sabotage and puts them under a microscope.
Our mission today is to take a stack of 19th century commentary centered on Charles Spurgeon's exposition of Psalm 140 from the Treasury of David and figure out why an ancient king's blueprint for surviving malicious gossip is the precise diagnostic manual we need today.
And we really have to set the scene for you, the listener. We are examining the cry of a hunted soul. The author is David, and he is not sitting comfortably on a throne right now.
Not at all.
He is in exile. He is being relentlessly pursued by his predecessor, King Saul, by informants like Doeg the Edomite, and by an entire army of men who are hungering for his destruction.
He is hiding in the wilderness, sleeping in caves, constantly looking over his shoulder. Wondering which of his friends might turn him in for a bounty.
We have to understand the sheer psychological weight of that situation. David is not fighting a conventional war where two armies line up on a battlefield.
It is not a fair fight.
No, it is a war of attrition. It's an asymmetrical conflict where the enemy uses espionage, rumors, and sudden ambushes. The tension is constant. Every snapping twig could be an assassin. Every rumor brought to Saul could mean another unit of soldiers dispatched to hunt him down.
Now, if you are listening to this right now, you might be thinking that a literal ancient king hunting you with spears in a desert feels a bit disconnected from your daily routine.
For sure, yeah.
But the experience David describes is a universal human reality. If you have ever been targeted by malicious gossip in your neighborhood, if you have faced workplace sabotage, where someone is quietly torpedoing your reputation to a manager, or if you have dealt with deceitful individuals who feign friendship while plotting your ruin, you are experiencing the modern equivalent of David's wilderness.
The weapons have evolved, certainly. We use emails and social media instead of spears and swords.
That is so true.
But the warfare is identical. The human heart has not changed, and the mechanics of malice operate on the same principles today as they did 3,000 years ago. What we see in this text is a distinct progression. We're going to track a trajectory that starts in the lowest, darkest valleys of fear and persecution.
And it moves through some dark stuff.
It does. It moves into a meticulous examination of how human malice operates, transitions into a fierce plea for divine justice, and concludes on the highest summits of peaceful repose in the presence of God.
Let's start right there in that dark valley, looking at the anatomy of malice. The text begins with a very direct, desperate plea, "Deliver me, O Lord, from the evil man."
Yeah.
And Spurgeon points out a very clear progression here. Malice does not just appear out of nowhere. It moves systematically from the internal to the external.
It starts in the heart.
Right, where the enemy imagines mischiefs. Then it moves to the gathering together for war. Finally, it reaches the tongue, which is sharpened like a serpent.
When David speaks of the evil man, we have to understand he is not complaining about a specific individual who offended him once. He is describing an archetype. He is outlining a species of unregenerate humanity.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, John Calvin offers a brilliant insight on the phrase, continually are they gathered together for war. Calvin notes that in the original languages, the phrasing implies they gather wars.
Gather wars, like plural.
Yes. They act as a human trumpet, constantly sounding a call to battle through the distribution of false information.
A human trumpet gathering wars. I want to linger on that visual for a second. It means this is not a passive dislike. When someone truly harbors this kind of malice, they do not just sit quietly in their house disliking you.
No, they launch a campaign.
They launch an active recruitment campaign. They need other people to hate you as much as they do.
That is the nature of a mob mentality, whether it is a literal mob or a corporate one. Spurgeon describes the heart of this archetype as a committee of opposition in permanent session.
Wow. A committee in permanent session.
Imagine a board of directors that never adjourns, perpetually considering the all-absorbing question of how to do the most harm to the righteous man. They are a standing army, always ready for the fray. The malice is not a momentary lapse in judgment, it is a full-time occupation.
This brings us to the biological imagery the text uses, and I find this absolutely chilling. Verse 3 says, they have sharpened their tongues like a serpent, adder's poison is under their lips. Now, I know you brought some fascinating natural history into this from our sources. We are not just talking about any generic snake here, are we?
We are not. The specific Hebrew word used for adder in this text is akhub. Natural historians like J.G. Wood and John Kitto have analyzed this specific term.
Okay.
Wood suggests that akhshub is a historical synonym for the Naja Hajj. For those outside the field of herpetology, that is commonly known as the spitting snake or the spitting cobra.
The spitting cobra. That alters the entire dynamic of a metaphor. I mean, a typical snake has to be right next to you to bite you. It has to make physical contact.
Right, meaning you usually know the threat is right at your feet.
Yes, but a spitting cobra can expel its venom from a significant distance. It aims for the eyes. It blinds its victim without ever coming into physical contact. Think about how slander operates in our modern world. Someone can destroy your reputation from across the office or across the internet without ever having to look you in the eye.
The venom is expelled from a safe distance, allowing the attacker to remain hidden while inflicting maximum damage. Furthermore, Joseph Roberts, who observed these serpents in their natural habitats, points out another specific detail.
What did he see?
When the cobra prepares to strike, it rears its head erect and its tongue begins to dart wildly. The rapid, vibrating motion of the tongue makes it look as though the serpent is literally sharpening it against its lips in preparation for the strike.
Oh, man.
The tongue appears and disappears, a blur of motion prepping the weapon.
It is the anticipation of the strike. The enemy is winding up, and the mechanics of this slander, the way the venom is actually delivered into a social circle, are so insidious. Frederick William Robertson provides an analysis of how this functions in society, and reading his commentary completely shifted my perspective.
It is a great piece of analysis.
He points out that true, destructive slander rarely relies on blatant, easily disprovable falsehoods.
If someone invents a complete, outrageous lie about you, it is often easy to refute. You can provide evidence to the contrary, and the liar is exposed. But half-truths, as Robertson notes, are far more venomous because they contain just enough truth to be plausible.
He paints this picture of idle people dropping slander as they go about their day. But you cannot put their words into a crucible and extract a measurable falsehood.
No, the poison is in the delivery.
Yes. A dropped lip, an arched eyebrow, a shrugged shoulder, or a skeptical expression can do the damage of 1,000 explicit lies. He even highlights the concept of emphatic silence.
Emphatic silence is brutal.
Think about a hypothetical scenario in a corporate board meeting. A manager brings up a candidate for a major promotion. I think Sarah has done excellent work this quarter. What does everyone think? Now, Sarah's rival does not need to say, Sarah is incompetent.
That would look petty.
Right. Instead, the rival just leans back in their chair, crosses their arms, looks down at the table, and stays completely, emphatically silent.
And that silence floods the room with doubt. It acts as the venom. It works and rankles in the minds of the other board members. They start thinking, well, what does he know about Sarah that we do not?
Yeah, the seed is planted.
It inflames hearts and fevers human existence. It poisons human society right at the fountain springs of life. The genius of that kind of malice is that the perpetrator leaves no fingerprints. They can always say, I never said a single bad word about her.
Yet the victim is still blinded by the venom. This raises an intense question about human nature itself. We like to think of this evil man as someone out there, a criminal, a tyrant, a uniquely toxic coworker. But the Apostle Paul, writing in his letter to the Romans, takes this exact verse from the Psalms, adder's poison is under their lips, and he applies it to everyone.
Paul argues that by nature, every single human being has as great a store of venomous words as a cobra has of poison.
That is a tough pill to swallow.
It is. The potential for this malice is universal. It is not limited to a specific class of villains. Given the right circumstances, the right provocation, or the right amount of envy, that venom can be brought to the surface in anyone.
There is a historical analogy provided by William Crashaw to explain how this poison operates within us, and I want to spend some time on it because it is so counterintuitive. He references Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt, who famously chose to die by the bite of asps rather than be taken captive by the Romans.
Crashaw focuses on the specific physiological effects of the asp's bite, as understood in history. According to accounts, the bite of the asp does not cause violent convulsions or excruciating agony.
Which is what you would expect from a deadly snake fight.
Right, but instead it brings on a gentle sweat and a sweet, heavy sleep. The initial pain is negligible, almost unnoticeable. The victim feels relaxed, perhaps even euphoric. But beneath that mask of comfort, the vital spirits are decaying.
It just shuts the body down.
The body weakens until the person quietly dies. The deadly venom creeps toward the heart completely undetected because the sensation is actually pleasant.
Sin and slander act in that same way. Let's be honest about human nature. Gossiping feels good.
Oh, people love it.
It feels like a sweet sleep. When someone shares a juicy rumor with you, or when you get to vent your frustration about someone you dislike, there's a rush of dopamine. It is deeply satisfying to the flesh. You feel bonded with the person you are gossiping with.
It feels like community building.
But Crashaw is arguing that this is spiritual poison. It enters the individual, creating a culture of bitterness. Then it diffuses through the family unit. Eventually runs like wildfire through a whole town, a church, or a society. It aims for the heart. And once it possesses that sovereign part of a person, it reigns and rages like a tyrant.
It creates a culture where suspicion replaces trust and where destruction replaces edification. The sweet sleep of gossip inevitably ends in the death of community.
So if we all have this venom in our nature, as Paul suggests, how do we prevent ourselves from becoming the evil man when we are provoked? Let's look at David's situation. He is being hunted. He has been slandered. He has lost his position, his home, and his dignity.
He has lost everything.
He has every right, from a human perspective, to be furious. How does he manage to express this righteous anger without acting on petty malice? How does he keep his own tongue from becoming a spitting cobra?
The distinction lies entirely in what David does with the anger. Anger is a natural response to injustice. But David took his wrongs to God in prayer rather than taking vengeance into his own hands. Spurgeon notes a critical dynamic in David's behavior. He was hot in language through indignation, but cool in action.
Hot in language, cool in action. I want everyone to write that down. That is such a vital principle.
David foresaw and desired the just vengeance of God upon the wicked. He did not pretend the evil was acceptable, yet he absolutely refused to avail himself of opportunities to revenge himself upon those who had done him wrong.
He yelled back.
We have to remember the historical narrative here. David actually had the opportunity to kill King Saul. Saul was sleeping in a cave, completely vulnerable, and David's own men urged him to strike.
They practically handed him the sword.
But David refused to touch the Lord's anointed. Taking his appeals to the great king cooled his anger. It allowed the presence of God to soothe his outrage. He left the unredressed wrongs at the foot of the heavenly throne, knowing they would be safe with the King of Kings.
That requires an immense amount of restraint. When someone attacks you, the instinct is to strike back immediately, to defend your reputation, to return fire with fire.
It is basic self-preservation.
To leave it at the foot of the throne requires a staggering amount of trust in divine justice. And it is even harder to maintain that restraint when you realize that malice rarely stays confined to words. Eventually, that venom boils over into physical action. That brings us to the next phase of this text, looking at the physical threat. Verses 4 and 5 shift the focus from the evil man to the violent man.
We are moving from the hidden plots of the heart and the venom of the tongue into the tangible traps set in the physical world. The malice has graduated from theory into practice.
The text describes the proud hiding a snare, cords, and a net by the wayside, setting gins to overthrow the goings of the righteous.
The location of these traps is the most significant detail in these verses. They are hidden by the wayside. The wayside, in the context of ancient paths, represents the daily path of duty.
That makes the threat so much more intimidating.
It does. Think about the implication. The danger David faces is not because he wandered off into forbidden territory. He did not go looking for trouble in enemy camps.
He was just minding his own business.
The danger is located right on the standard, obedient path of his daily life. The enemy stoops to incredibly mean, cowardly actions. They are so terrified of missing their prey that they multiply their devices. They use snares, nets, and gins. If one mechanism fails, another will trigger.
You brought a historical account to my attention that perfectly visualizes this concept. It is from James Hutton in 1857, detailing the tactics of the dacoits of India. Could you lay out how they operated? Because it really brings these verses to life.
The dacoits were highly skilled, organized bands of thieves who operated in India. Hutton tells a specific story of a treasure guard traveling through a dense jungle. The dacoits did not engage in honorable combat. They did not challenge the guards to a fight.
That is not their style.
Instead, they used the environment itself as a weapon. They tied strong ropes across the road directly in the path of the approaching guard. They festooned these ropes to the massive trees on both sides of the road, creating a literal web.
And they did not just block the front, right?
Correct. They also had ropes ready behind the guard. They waited with absolute patience in the dense brush until the entire convoy, the guard, the troopers, the infantry, and the treasure carts, were entirely within the designated kill zone.
Terrifying.
Then they swiftly ran the hind ropes across the road, securing them to the trees, boxing their prey in completely. When the trap was finally sprung, the victims were caught entirely by surprise. The troopers tried to spur their horses over the ropes, but the animals became entangled. It was total chaos, designed to immobilize the target before a single sword was swung.
That account perfectly illustrates the cords and nets David is talking about. It highlights the coordination required for this kind of malice. Slander might be done by a single individual whispering a rumor, but sabotage requires arranging circumstances. It requires building a web.
You need a team for that.
And think about the psychological toll of fighting an enemy who uses those tactics. You mentioned a commentary by Benjamin Weiss that points out an even darker layer to this.
Weiss focuses on the phrase regarding traps set by the encampment or by the path. If traps are being set in the immediate vicinity of where David is sleeping, it implies a terrifying level of betrayal.
The call is coming from inside the house.
Exactly. The men David trusted, the soldiers standing watch around his camp, might have been bribed. They might be watching his movements, noting his habits, and selling that information to his enemies so the snares can be placed with perfect precision.
If you are dealing with office politics or a toxic social dynamic, think about the modern equivalents of the dacoit ambush. These are professional snares hidden under the brushwood of your daily routine. It is the coworker who sets a trap in an email thread.
Oh, email traps are classic.
They send a vague request, copy your manager, and wait for you to reply in a way that can be misinterpreted as insubordinate or incompetent. They wait until you are fully in the kill zone of the email chain before springing the net. The traps are laid in the normal execution of your job.
The enemy uses differing devices depending on the target's vulnerabilities. If a righteous person cannot be cajoled or flattered into making a mistake, perhaps they can be bribed.
Right.
If they cannot be bribed, perhaps they can be cowed by intimidation. If they stand firm against fear, maybe they can be provoked into anger, prompting a rash reaction that can then be used to discredit them. The malignant mind is infinitely creative in twisting words, misreading intentions, and misdirecting efforts.
I have to ask a question that naturally arises from this. It is a question anyone who has suffered injustice asks. Why does God allow these snares to be laid in the path of duty in the first place?
That is the big question.
If I am doing what I am supposed to do, if I am walking the righteous path, trying to live honestly, shouldn't that path be clear of traps? Why doesn't God just sweep the wayside clean?
It is the most natural human reaction to suffering. We assume obedience should guarantee a frictionless life, but the sources we are analyzing suggest a completely different theological perspective. The existence of these traps and God's permission of them proves the absolute necessity of a divine keeper.
Wait, how does the presence of a trap prove we need a keeper?
Because it exposes the inadequacy of human watchfulness. No matter how observant you are, no matter how high your emotional intelligence is, you cannot see a trap hidden under the grass of your daily routine.
You just cannot anticipate everything.
Neither your own vigilance nor the faithfulness of your closest friends can secure you against the serpentine assaults of a truly dedicated foe. Human intellect is simply not enough to outmaneuver supernatural malice. Only God can outwit the devices of the violent man. By allowing the traps to exist, God forces the believer to realize that their reliance cannot be on their own cleverness, but must be entirely on Him.
When human vigilance fails, the believer has no choice but to look upward. We cannot look side to side anymore because we do not know who is holding the ropes. That realization forces David into the next section of the text where he makes his ultimate appeal.
Verse 6.
Right, verse 6. David says, I said unto the Lord, Thou art my God. And then he praises God, saying, Thou hast covered my head in the day of battle.
Notice the deliberate covenantal choice in claiming my God. It is a statement of exclusive reliance. He is not appealing to a generic, distant deity. He is appealing to a personal God with whom he has a binding agreement.
William Gurnall has a fantastic insight on this covenantal relationship. He says the believer can venture all they are worth on the public faith of heaven, knowing God will never break his covenant.
The public faith of heaven. That phrase carries immense weight. It means God has staked his own reputation, his own holiness, on his promises to his people.
His name is on the line.
If God were to fail a believer who trusts entirely in him, it would blot his own name. He would be seen by the cosmos as a covenant breaker. Because God's nature is perfectly pure and faithful, the believer can rest entirely on that promise. It is not a gamble, it is an investment in a guaranteed reality.
The imagery David uses to describe how this protection manifests is striking. Thou hast covered my head in the day of battle. This brings us to a specific cultural context that we need to unpack. You found some incredible details about the ancient role of the armor-bearer.
Yes. In ancient Near Eastern warfare, a captain, a prince, or a champion always had an armor-bearer stationed directly beside him. The primary duty of this armor-bearer was not to fight offensively.
They weren't swinging swords.
No, their specific job was to stand next to their master and ward off blows aimed at the head. In the chaotic heat of a melee, a warrior's attention is focused forward. They might not see a spear thrust from the periphery or a battle axe crashing down from a blind spot. The armor-bearer held a massive shield over his master's head to absorb those unseen, fatal blows.
Think about the resonance of that for David. I mean, he famously fought Goliath. Goliath had an armor-bearer walking in front of him, carrying a shield the size of a door.
A massive piece of equipment.
David went into that valley with no physical armor whatsoever. He refused Saul's heavy bronze helmet and coat of mail. Yet the giant perished, and the shepherd boy lived. David recognizes that God himself stepped into the role of his armor-bearer.
The shield of the Eternal is an infinitely better protection than a helmet of brass. When arrows fly thick and fast, when the air is filled with the venom of slander and the hidden nets are springing all around, there is no covering for the head quite like the might of the Almighty.
It's the ultimate defense.
David is essentially saying, I have survived battles I mathematically should have died in. It wasn't because of my agility or my tactical genius. It was solely because the Lord held a shield over my head.
In the middle of describing all this frantic warfare, the trap setting and the shield bearing, there is a tiny word dropped into the text, Selah. It is generally understood as a musical term, but Andrew A. Bonar observes a beautiful theological function for its placement here.
The Selah commands the reader to stop reading and pause. It is an intentional break in the action. Bonar paints the picture beautifully. The enemy is frantic. They are busy laying snares, hiding cords, multiplying traps, whispering rumors, working themselves into a frenzy of malice.
Exhausting themselves.
But the believer is prompted by the Selah to sit calmly and sing, My God art thou.
The contrast is stunning. The frantic, exhausting energy of malice versus the calm, seated repose of faith. The people trying to destroy you are losing sleep while you are resting under the shield. But right after this pause, David prays something that might make modern listeners uncomfortable.
What does he say?
In verse 8, he prays, Grant not, O Lord, the desires of the wicked, lest they exalt themselves. Now, if God is already acting as the armor-bearer, why does David need to instruct God not to grant the wicked their desires? Doesn't an omniscient God already know what to do?
This touches on the foundational theology of prayer. Prayer is never about informing God of things he does not know. God is not lacking data.
He does not need a briefing from us.
Right. Prayer is the mechanism by which the believer aligns their own heart with God's justice. David is voicing his reliance. But there is a deeper structural insight here found in the phrase, lest they exalt themselves. This is an issue of cosmic pride.
So if the wicked succeed in their malicious plots against the righteous, who gets the credit for that success?
They do. They will credit their own pride, their own policy, their own cleverness. They will throw a party to boast about how perfectly their traps worked, and in doing so, they actively dishonor God.
They steal the glory.
They declare that human cunning is superior to divine protection. Their glory is in direct opposition to the glory of God. If they prosper, their heads strike against the heavens. Therefore, the believer prays for their failure not just out of self-preservation, but to protect the glorious God, ensuring that evil does not get to claim a public victory over righteousness.
It is about maintaining the moral order of the universe.
Hmm.
He is saying, Lord, do not let them think they outsmarted you. This leads us into a dramatic shift in the text. We move from a posture of defense into the active rebound of divine justice.
The tone of the psalm intensifies significantly here. The shield is lowered, and the sword of justice is drawn.
Verses 9 through 11 asks for things that sound terrifying. David asks that the mischief of the enemy's own lips cover them, that burning coals fall upon them, that they be cast into deep pits, and that evil hunt the violent man to overthrow him.
We are dealing here with the concept of lex talionis, the law of retaliation. This is a core principle in the justice of God, where the punishment frequently and perfectly mirrors the crime. The very trap an enemy sets becomes the mechanism of their own undoing.
Let's break down the physics of this divine justice, because the sources use some vivid analogies. It is compared to a stone hurled violently upward into the sky. Gravity guarantees it will fall back onto the thrower's head.
What goes up must come down.
Or it is like a person who spends hours digging a concealed pit to trap their neighbor, only to forget where they dug it and fall into it themselves in the dark.
It is an unavoidable law of spiritual physics. Whatever malice you send out into the world, it rebounds. You cannot introduce that much poison into the atmosphere without eventually breathing it in yourself. Slanderers eventually become the victims of slander because they have built a community that normalizes betrayal.
The specific imagery David uses, burning coals and deep pits, is not just random poetry. There is a geographical reason for this. T.C. Barth points out that David is writing this while hiding in the wilderness of En-Gedi. If you stand on the rocky cliffs of En-Gedi and look out, you are looking directly over the Dead Sea.
You are looking at the very site of Sodom and Gomorrah.
The landscape itself is a permanent monument to divine judgment. David is looking down at the place where fire and brimstone fell from the sky, where the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits that swallowed up kings.
That is incredible context.
This geography directly inspires his prayer. He sees the historical evidence of God's wrath on his horizon, and he prays for that same standard of justice to apply to his persecutors. He says, "Let them be cast into the fire." They kindled the flames of strife in his life, so it is mathematically fair that they are consumed by those same flames.
Joseph Carroll provides another incredible analogy for verse 11. Evil shall hunt the violent man to overthrow him. Carroll compares the violent man's own sins to a pack of greedy hounds.
This is such a vivid, terrifying picture. Walk us through it.
The violent man commits his crime, sets his trap, and walks away. He thinks he has escaped. He thinks his sins are covered up, hidden under the brushwood, lost to history. But his own evil acts like a pack of bloodhounds with a very keen scent.
They lock onto the target.
They are released the moment the sin is committed. They might lose sight of the game for a moment, the scent might go cold in the minds of the public, but the hounds of divine justice keep working it out. They nose through the brush, they relentlessly track him down.
The hounds of his own sin hunt him to his ruin. You cannot outrun what you have unleashed. I want to push back here, though. People listening today, raised on New Testament principles, might hear these prayers asking for burning coals and deep pits and think David sounds vindictive. How do we reconcile this intense desire for burning coals with the call to love our enemies?
It is a vital tension to address. George Horne and William de Burr help clarify this in their commentaries. They explain these verses not as expressions of petty personal revenge, but as prophetic declarations of God's final judgment against all falsehood and violence.
Okay, so it is bigger than just David.
Much bigger. David is appealing to the judge of the universe. He is not taking a sword to his enemies himself. He is asking the Supreme Court to issue a righteous ruling.
He is asking for justice, not vengeance. Vengeance is, I will hurt you because you hurt me. Justice is, Lord, stop this evil from destroying your world.
Correct. True justice requires that those who kindle the flames of strife be consumed by them. Otherwise, evil goes unchecked. It is an acknowledgement of God's perfect moral order. Evil bears the element of decay within itself. It is a corruption of design.
It eats itself.
Therefore, evil carries the seed of its own destruction. To pray for the downfall of the wicked is to agree with God that evil cannot be permitted to permanently triumph.
When David prays for their downfall, he's actually agreeing with the structural integrity of the universe. He is saying, Lord, let the rules of your universe apply. Let gravity work. Let the stone fall back down. And that brings an immense comfort to the believer, knowing that the universe is not chaotic, but governed by a righteous judge who ensures the ledger is eventually balanced.
And that reality perfectly sets up the final section of our text. After the storm of divine justice sweeps away the wicked, the text ends in a place of profound peace and absolute certainty.
Verses 12 and 13 declare, I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and the right of the poor. Surely the righteous shall give thanks unto thy name, the upright shall dwell in thy presence. Let's focus on those two words, I know. It is not I hope, or I think, or maybe if I am lucky this will work out. It is a statement of absolute bedrock confidence.
Throughout the psalm, David has been bravely confident, but here he reaches a crescendo of assurance. He speaks of things about which he has absolutely no doubt.
Why is he so sure?
Because he has received actual historical proofs of it himself. He survived the lion and the bear when he was a shepherd. He survived the giant Goliath. He has survived the javelins thrown by Saul. His theology is not theoretical. It is forged in the fires of actual deliverance.
He specifically mentions the afflicted and the poor. In earthly courts, the poor often cannot afford to defend themselves. If a wealthy, powerful man like King Saul decides to destroy a poor shepherd, the shepherd usually loses. The system is rigged.
Usually, yes.
But David says, I know that the Lord will maintain the cause. The judge of all the earth takes up the case of those who cannot afford representation.
Thomas Wilcox expands on this idea beautifully. He
Right.
says this verse teaches us the excellent estate of God's children. They are continually thankful because God is continually merciful to them.
They always have a reason to sing.
Whoever else might be silenced by oppression, the righteous will always find a reason to give thanks. The prosperous and wealthy can maintain their own cause in earthly arenas through bribery and influence, but those who cannot help themselves find that God himself steps in as their advocate.
The ultimate goal of all this struggle, all this warfare, is found in the final verse. The upright shall dwell in thy presence. The sources describe this state as songs without words.
Sitting down in holy peace, like children at their father's table. After the hounds of justice have cleared the field, after the snares are broken, the believer sits down.
Ah, finally resting.
Their very lives, their walking and resting with God, become a practical form of gratitude. They do not even need to speak. Their secure, peaceful presence in the throne room is a song of praise all on its own.
Let's look at the staggering contrast between the beginning and the end of this text. It starts with the believer, hunted like a partridge by evil men, hiding in a literal wilderness, dodging hidden traps, and recoiling from the venom of spitting cobras.
A night there.
And it ends with the believer sitting securely in the throne room of the Almighty, dwelling in absolute, untouchable peace.
It is a complete reversal of fortune. The text demonstrates how faith raises the saint from the lowest depths of earthly terror to the highest summits of heavenly repose.
For you, listening to this today, there is a life-altering application here. The pressure of persecution, the venom of the office gossip, the professional snares laid by the wayside, these are horrific things to endure.
Absolutely brutal.
But they're often the very mechanisms that drive the believer into the presence of God.
Oh.
If David had been comfortable in the palace, if Saul had liked him, if everyone had spoken well of him, he might never have been forced into the wilderness to cry out, "Thou art my God," with such raw desperation and intimacy.
The trial produces the reliance, and the reliance results in dwelling in the presence of the Almighty. The peace at the end is only possible because of the warfare at the beginning.
Which brings us to our final thought. As we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you with something to chew on long after the audio ends. Think back to that X-ray machine we talked about at the beginning, the one that cannot quite capture the murky reality of human malice.
Yeah, that invisible threat.
We spend so much energy trying to avoid the evil man, trying to step around the snares, trying to dodge the venom of slander. We pray for a frictionless life. But consider this. If the venom of the evil man and the hidden snares by the wayside are the precise things that force us to our knees, causing us to abandon our own self-reliance and cry out, "Thou art my God."
Wait, you're suggesting...
Could it be that the very traps meant for our destruction are used by a sovereign God as the stepping stones that elevate us into his eternal presence?
Wow, that changes everything.
Thank you for listening to Reformed Thinking. We will see you on the next Deep Dive.